right, welcome back. So it's time to start adding Firebase to our starting code. So we've got this beautiful app that has no data storage, no Firebase, and we need to fix that. So things are going to start off by going to visit your Firebase console. So go ahead and head over to console.firebase.google.com. So from here you'll see all your projects. Click on Create New Project. And what I want you to do is I want you to make one for your username and then password keeper. You can put a hyphen in there or not put a hyphen in there. I don't really care. And then since I've done it before, I'm going to have to add the word video. Don't add the word video. Once it creates your app, you'll see a home screen here for like add Firebase to these different platforms. I'm going to do just a little bit of work and then come back to this screen. One of the things that I like to do is I like to visualize what my data is going to look like. So in a real app, I would probably start off by like making a little bit of fake data. But I'm not too worried about that now. My main plan is I'm going to have stuff on the user's path, and then this is a fake UID, and then there's going to be like a UID, and then there's going to be a generated password. Sorry, I should have said generated key for a password, and then it's going to have inside here a service. So for example, let's say you were a Google Fi user. A username, I'll just go ahead and put Fisher DS, and then finally your password, which I'll say is blah blah. So you don't have to type that in, but I typically like to think about my data and think about kind of like how am I going to structure it. So I'm going to have this user's path and then my UIDs of all my different users, and then each password is going to have an auto-generated key, and then it's going to have these fields. Great, so I just wanted to think that over. The other thing that I like to think about is what do I want the rules to be. So right now the rules are set for auth must be not null, not null. We're going to go ahead and give you some different rules this time. My goal on rules is that you understand that they exist. You kind of understand a little bit about what they do, but I'm not too worried about you writing your own rules. And the reason for that is because I think that it's likely to change, right? So if you look at how they do rules today, you can do it with JSON. You can also do it with a tool called Blaze, a tool called Bolt. And then if you're doing file storage, that's also different. If you watch a video, I'll put a link to it above. There's a lot of good information there. It kind of looks like they really like the file storage approach. So I think eventually these JSON things will probably get deprecated, to be honest. So I don't want to teach you to write them, but I at least want you to know what they are and know that they exist and know that you can use them. So here, I'll read it to you kind of. So it says on the user's path, so that name is important. I'm going to have in this user's path UIDs. This $sign means wildcard, so match anything. And then the UID is just a word that I wrote, just pick because it makes sense for what it is. So inside this path, you can only read and write if auth is not null and the auth, like the person who signed in at the time they're using this, their UID when they're signed in must match the path's UID. It's kind of neat how you can use this variable in multiple places, by the way. So it makes sure that the data is completely siloed, right? So only you can read stuff in your zone. Depending on what type of app you're making, you may want that, you may not. So for example, in the lab, we'll do a photo buckets auth. So in that environment, everybody can see everybody's pictures, but only you can edit your own. So the structure has to be a little bit different in the data. And I think once you get to the lab, you'll see the different ways you could do it. But this is for when your data is completely siloed, only you can see your own data. The only value of having a Firebase in this is if you have like a web app and an iOS app. That's really the only value of this password keeper, so that you can use Firebase with different products. Each password has to have a service and a password. So it has to have a service and a password. And then it can optionally have a username or not, depending on what the service is. And then it cannot have any other things. So I'm going to click on Publish. So now I have those rules. This one actually fits those rules just fine. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this one just because it was temporary. I just kind of wanted to use it for planning. The other thing we want to do is we want to go into the auth area and we want to play around in there a little bit. And I want to go into sign-in methods. So this first one shows me my users. We'll come back to this later, but right now I want to go to sign-in methods, and I want to enable the different sign-in methods. So the first one we're going to do is what's called anonymous auth. Anonymous auth, so I just click on enable here, is really used for testing. It just says, hey, sign this person in, and they don't have to put in a username, no password. It just says, great, you're signed in now. It's great for testing, not useful for much else. Email password is another one that I want to use. That one I will make kind of part of my final app. So I'm going to turn on email password. And then in this follow along, we're going to implement Google Auth. Now, Google Auth, Facebook Auth, Twitter Auth, and GitHub Auth, they're all using OAuth 2. In this follow along, we're going to do Google. In the lab, you're going to have to implement one of these others like on your own. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn on Google Authentication. Google Authentication is actually the easiest one to do of the four because Firebase is owned by Google, so they integrate that one in pretty well. These others you have to do a little bit more work for, but it's definitely possible. Great, I've turned on those three. I'm also going to be using Rosefire, but I don't have to turn anything on for that. So I think my back end is almost all set up. One more thing I want to do is I want to get that Google Services plist file. So I'm going to go and click on Add Firebase to your app. In order to add it to my app, I'm going to have to go get the bundle. So I can get the bundle from right here. Now this will be interesting for you. So I went ahead and just copy pasted it in. You probably are going to want to change your username here. I hadn't thought this over, to be honest. And you're probably going to want to change it here as well, right, to be your username. That way there won't be a conflict between you and me on the back end. So I go ahead and click on Add App. That prompts me to download my G-Services plist. So I'm just going to go ahead and download it. Everybody has their own styles on these things. I like to put it into my downloads folder personally, and then I'll copy it in to Xcode. You do not have to do it that way. That's just how I chose to do it. And then I'll just click on Show in Finder here. And then now this file is what I'm going to drag and drop over. I guess I may as well just do it. So I take this file, I drag and drop it. I'm going to put it right at the bottom of this guy. I make sure to select Copy Items if needed. Great. And so that Copy Items if needed, that's what drags it from my Downloads folder and puts it right here. And you can see inside of this, there's things that like, what's my database URL? And it lists the database URL there. Because I have different sign-ins enabled, you can see that like, is sign-in enabled? Yes. So it's nice to do those things, those enablings before you get that plist. But even if you don't, you could always fix it later. Cool. So I did those steps, which is good. And now I can kind of follow along with the steps they list here. The next step they list here is to do a pod init. We've already done that. We already have pods. We're already using pods. And then they say to add pod Firebase. So yep, I'm going to need a pod Firebase. The nice thing is that we're already using pods in this app. The starting code I gave you is using pods. You can actually do the pod file edits right inside Xcode, which is fun. So we want Firebase, and it tells us Firebase, but we actually want more than just Firebase. We're going to also want auth and database. Now, how do I know these magic words? Well, on the slides, there's some links to some of the other Firebase pods that they have available here. I'll just let it come up and scroll to the bottom. And you can see that there's Firebase Core, which you actually get by default if you've included just Firebase, and then Firebase Auth, and then Firebase Database. So these are how I knew the names of these other things. The way pods work is you can type things in your pod file, but that doesn't actually do much. What you have to actually do is you have to open up terminal, and you have to run some things from the command line. Now the place where you have to run these from is actually from this folder. So I'm going to type cd space in terminal, and then I'm going to cheat, of course, because that's what I do. I'm just going to right click on one of these folders and say show in Finder. So that led me to that folder in the final. I'm going to kind of go back up one layer. And so where I want to CD into is I actually want to CD into this folder, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of very delicately drag that and drop it onto my terminal. And then you can see it typed that path with all those nasty looking spaces in it. Once you CD in that location, you can do an ls just to kind of make sure all the right files are here. The main one I'm looking for is that pod file. From here, you can type pod install, as we've done a couple of times. What pod install is going to do for you is it's going to go through and grab all those Firebase pods, right? So it grabbed Firebase, Analytics, Auth, Database, a couple other things, right? And if you also want to see in your list over here, you can see that, hey, now it's got Firebase, Auth, Analytics, Database, all kinds of goodness is now available to you. Great, so we're doing super. I also think it's funny how once we taught you pods, how many times we're using pods. It's like we're using pods for everything. Gonna write some code? No, go get some pods. Let's do the last step, which is to configure our app in the app delegate. This is just necessary anytime you're using Firebase now. So I'm going to go into my app delegate. I'm going to type my first line of code that uses Firebase, and that is import Firebase. Cross my fingers that nothing bad happens, nothing exploded, which is good. I go into did finish launching with options. There's already quite a bit of stuff in there. That's fine. So I'm just going to say for app dot configure. And then I'm just going to go ahead and run it. You'll notice that I'm already not showing the login screen, so I've got that set to false. And so it's going to show up with this screen. And then what I'm looking for is I'm looking for some logs. So I come down here, I go digging into the logs, and sure enough, I've got what I wanted. It ends with Firebase Analytics enabled. So I know that's not a very exciting thing to see log messages, but I can see that now we have the power of Firebase and we're ready to start doing things with it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cut this video off now because we've done the Firebase integration into your app. Come back next time and we'll start in on authenticating anonymously. All right, see you then. Bye.